morning or good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are today. Thank you so much, Katarina, for including me today. And thank you also for everybody who kept so well on time. I can't believe we're actually doing this right on time. Well done, y'all. In Andrea O'Reilly's book, Matricentric Feminism, she suggests that that matricentric perspective will allow us to address, quote, the topics of mothers, mothering, and motherhood as it relates to deserving serious and sustained scholarly inquiry that seeks to develop research and activism from the experience and the perspective of mothers, and that also contests, challenges, and counters the patriarchal oppressive institution of motherhood and seeks to imagine and implement maternal identity in a practice that is empowering to mothers. Through this perspective and this lens, I investigate historical accounts of motherhood and mothering that were buried in memoirs and biographies of women archaeologists from the 19th and 20th centuries, and critical contemporary portrayals and accounts of mothers in archaeology, including my own. I suggest that these historical and contemporary accounts of motherhood can act as a template for how we can talk about and normalize motherhood in a meaningful way that can empower mothers in archaeology and push the field of archaeology towards a more inclusiveness of their needs and narratives. So to do this, I've looked at, over 23 accounts at this point of women archaeologists from their own accounts. I don't have time to talk about all of them here today, I wish, but we can take a look at a few of them and look at their mothering experiences, right? I see these breaking down into roughly groups of mothers, women who did not marry and have children, and then those that did and how they talk about it, right? So we think about Jane Ellen Harrison and Gertrude Canton Thompson. Neither of these women married. Harrison wrote in her work that, quote, by what miracle I escaped marriage, I do not know. I do not doubt that I lost much, but I am quite sure I gained more. Marriage, for a woman at least, hampers the two things that made life glorious to me, friendship and learning. Canton Thompson wrote in her work that she had two marriage proposals that she did not consider. She stayed, remained unmarried, and she wrote in her memoir, quote, my reaction to babies has always been one of avoidance verging on dislike. They seem to me the least attractive of all the vertebrates. Yikes, right? But perhaps both these women at their time recognized that being a mother would have been at odds with the professional archaeologist practice that they engaged with in the first part of the 20th century. Tatiana Proskoryakov and Bertha Dutton neither married, although both of them in their works recount that their students were their children. We might think of them as having found family. Dutton in particular ran an archaeology summer camp for Girl Scouts in the 1940s in the US Southwest. And she wrote at one point that she considered herself to have over 200 daughters, the young girls that she worked with. There are a number of women that talk about their experiences and how it affected their motherhood, how motherhood affected their experiences. Harriet Boyd Hawes struggled to find work because of motherhood in archaeology, admitting, quote, under the necessity of publishing excavation results and having the days filled with the care of my son, she had to be both an archaeologist and a mother. To do that, one would have to be willing to give up her intellectual life for at least 10 years after marriage to have a family. Mary Leakey wrote in her memoir, some of her accounts of having children. She wrote after the birth of her first son, Jonathan, in 1940, quote, I quite liked having a baby. I think I won't put it more strongly than that, but I had no intention of allowing motherhood to disrupt my work as an archaeologist. Florence Lister, working in the US Southwest, married another archaeologist, Bob Lister. They had two boys, and she worked in the lab to support her husband's fieldwork and lamented at never finishing her PhD, writing, quote, many times during those early years, despite what I saw as my domestic obligations and privileges, I wished I could have finished my degree and that had been interrupted by marriage. It had never seemed to have the time, the money, or the opportunity to do so. And finally, Jane Kelly wrote that after having and caring for her children, it affected her career trajectory in terms of the length of time it took her to complete her PhD, her ability to work in the field and to attend professional conferences, and her perceived exclusion from the professional networks that were at the time almost exclusively dominated by men. And writing that, quote, time invested in raising children, in making a marriage work, and running a house is usually not available for professional activities. Right. These are just a few of the historic accounts. And I've also written and talked about my own experiences, both being pregnant in the field here in both those images on the left, pregnant with my first and second child, and about how I am seen as both an archaeologist and a mother when I drag my kids around to archaeological projects locally when I do them here. But these are important questions to ask because when we think about women in STEM and archaeology in particular, we see that in a STEM study, 71% of new mothers cited the reason that they left STEM was because of family-related necessity, right? They could not do their work because of their obligations in the home. Although it's not super recent, the Society for American Archaeology found that men applied for NSF funding at more than twice the rate of women, and that almost every woman interviewed discussed the problems of family responsibility in scheduling fieldwork and their inability to apply for funding. So in conclusion, I argue that from a matricentric feminist perspective, the radical act of sharing our experiences of both historic and contemporary is vital. It opens the dialogue for a larger and much needed discussion centered on mothers and motherhood in archaeology. That sharing can be in formal places like this forum, in books, in articles, and it can also be via social media places, less formal, where images can be shared along those lines. And that recognizing and giving space to that identity of motherhood in the field of archaeology will only help show that mothers have an important place in the field and will go a long way towards normalizing the practice and reframing motherhood and archaeology. My research comes from two upcoming publications, a book chapter that Katarina also has a chapter in, and an article I'm working on for publication that highlights more of those historic contexts. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your attention today.